All right, here we are for another episode of the Illuminated Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about metal season, and metal season is a long, huge season. There's a lot here. Time-wise, it's long. It's from Autumn Equinox, which is September 22nd, to Winter Solstice, which is December 21st. So that's a long time, and energetically, there's a lot happening. There's a lot here. And it's a lot of stuff. It pulls on a lot of different parts of us that can bring up a lot of resistance and fear and issues around faith and trust in ourselves and something bigger. So there's a lot here. And so this is going to be one episode of several. We're not sure how many yet, but there are going to be multiple parts to this metal season, and this is just the first one. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Illuminated Podcast and what illumination means to me. To me, illumination is a light that comes from inside. It's a light that comes from within. It's a light of consciousness that is cultivated through the hard, through a lot of inner work and sitting with parts of ourselves that we may not like, that we may be afraid of, that we may not want to sit with, but doing it anyway and coming into a place of wholeness with ourselves. And it's this sort of lunar luminescence that comes only through embodied matter, through the embodiment of a soul coming down into the physicality, the density of yinny matter and expressing itself from within. That to me is what illumination is about. And so what we're doing here is really bringing the light of our conscious awareness into the depths of our embodied experience in service to the wisdom that's always been there. We're looking into the nooks and crannies of the bits and pieces that are subconscious, unconscious, or have been marginalized or forgotten, but that hold the keys for being here. The keys to being a wise and well human who is also this eternal soul that's just expressing itself in this physical vessel in this moment. That's what we're doing here. We're looking into the depths for the wisdom that has always been there. It's right in front of our faces. We're just getting our little lanterns and shining in some conscious awareness there. So what we're doing here so far is sharing seasonal wisdom from a psycho-spiritual perspective to support this embodied wholeness in these transformational times. Being present with nature and presencing and observing how natural rhythms move and what they do here and when they do them it offers a roadmap for being alive and well in times of change. And we are in massive evolutionary times. These times, this moment that we're in, especially right now and for the next 6 months for sure, is going to be very intense. But even the next year to 2 years this is a window of time that has been prophesied about for millennia by seers and philosophers and astrologers and alchemists and you name it, religious people, prophets from all parts of the spectrum, all walks of life, all, like slants and political views and philosophies. This moment that we're in has been talked about and cared for and known about for centuries. And we are the ones that are walking it out. We are the ones that are carrying it. We are the ones that are holding the tension of opposites between the dying old and the disintegration that's there, and this new that we can't yet see and we can only kind of a little bit feel, we're the ones that are bridging the two. And we're seeing a lot of people lose their shit about that. We're seeing a lot of people not know how to do it. We're seeing a lot of people have crises of faith. We're seeing a lot of people come into faith in a new way. And we're going to see a lot more of that. And it's going to get intense, even more intense than it is in this moment. We're recording this on September 18th, 2025, and we are in a very intense moment here. There's been a lot happening, and there is going to be more happening. And what I'm offering here are just some tools to help us build the muscle that allows us to withstand the intensity of transformation. And also just a space to feel seen and heard and held, because it helps to be with people who get it and who see things the way that you're seeing things and feel things the way that you're feeling. And so this is just a space for that, and maybe some helpful tools, hopefully. So I just wanted to take a minute to talk about a little bit about what we're doing here. As I learn and grow and get better at this, that'll be a little bit more succinctly expressed. But for now, that was what was on my heart about the Illuminated podcast and what my intention is and where my heart is for what we're doing with that. Okay, so today's episode, like I said, we're going to be talking about metal season, and we're just going to do an introduction to metal season because I think it's so much more than just spooky season and Halloween and that kind of stuff. There's a reason that those themes, proliferate here, but there's a lot that can be done here. And there's a lot of angst and fear and kind of trepidation as well, because what we're doing here is we're returning to the below, right? We're returning to the underworld here. And it's just a natural, normal, and very important part of the life cycle. But for lots of reasons, we've been made to be fearful of these energetics, especially because there's a lot of the unknown here. So I wanted to talk about what this season is really all about from a Chinese medical perspective, from an ancient Taoist shamanic perspective with the slant of Chinese medicine. And so we'll kind of talk about the feeling of it, the texture of it, what we're really up to in this season. And then I want to go through the seasonal associations, like what organ systems are involved, what parts of the body are involved, the spirit of it. All right. So metal season is fall. It's autumn. And we call it fall, which very succinctly encapsulates the energetics of the season. Things are literally falling. They're being invited to, fall away and go downward. And I always call metal season magic making season because it feels very ethereal. It feels very ephemeral. We talk a lot about how the veil thins this time of year. And there's a reason for that. That this is an actual energetic thing that is happening. And the veil is thinning as the wheel of life necessarily turns toward the underworld. Things have to die away in order to make room for the new. Change, death, and decay and disintegration are vital themes here, and they're in service to the vitality of life in the future. What we're doing here is we are, letting things fall and die and, kind of come into the soil where they're going to be composted. And the most precious essence and nutrients and minerals and crystals are going to be extracted out of the dead material, out of the decaying matter, and returned back to the soil for fertile nourishment in the springtime, for stable, rooted, strong forward growth in the future. That's what we're doing here. But there's this whole dying thing, and that can feel, there's this, surrendering to the unknown, right? The invitation of metal season is to surrender to the unknown. And it requires a willingness to let go of the known, a willingness to let go of the known, a choice to see with different eyes that luminous light that can only come from the depths of matter and from the yin nature of embodied experience. That's what I was talking about before. This is what we're talking about with illumination. It comes from the depths of embodied experience, but only with our conscious awareness of it. Otherwise, if we're not conscious of what's going on in the depths and we don't look at it, it tends to get unruly. There's a lot of distortion that can happen there. And it looks like things like addictions and self-sabotage and, unhealed trauma and wounds that play up in ways that we're not fully conscious of, but we see them working through our lives. This is the season that we sit with that we sit with those things and get curious about them and care for them so that we can compost them into gold and vital, life-giving nourishment going forward. This is what we're doing here in metal. So, there's some business there. And it's really about bringing an attitude of curiosity and wonder and inspired presence to what's happening instead of a sense of already knowing. It's really important to kind of move into and cherish this space of the unknown and of not knowing. Because when you don't know and you kind of can lean back into the not knowing, it opens things up and creates way more spaciousness for infinite possibilities. And so we kind of make space for that uncertainty, for confusion, and for all of the resistances that come with that. As we're intentionally building up that muscle that I talked about before, and a more resilient capacity to withstand the intensity of these transformational times. We have to intentionally make space for, my teachers, Lori and Benjamin, call it a confusion tolerance. We're allowing space to be confused. We're allowing space to not know. We're allowing space for our resistances and tantruming to come up. And just holding space for that as, a vital part of the process. This is the season of alchemy, right? This is where we kind of die so that there can be a rebirth. Transformation isn't about, returning things and restoring things to the way that they used to be. It's not about restoration. It's transformation. It's changing completely. It's using what has been as fuel for something new, for a new possibility, for new potentials to arise. And that's why I call it magic making season. So we talked about, how resistances and self-sabotage can pop up here. Grief inevitably pops up here because we're letting go of the old. We're letting go of old people, places, things that we loved, that were important to us. We're letting go of old versions of ourselves. There is inevitably going to be grief here. And because the ask is to surrender into the unknown, to trust in something much bigger than ourselves, crises of faith can happen here in this season. And we're going to see this as a theme more so this metal season than other metal seasons because of certain planetary transits that are happening, specifically Saturn retrograding back into Pisces, which, a massive traumatic event happened days after Saturn retrograded back into Pisces that has so far really stirred up the themes around faith and surrender and believing in something bigger than ourselves or not. And there's a lot of friction there. And so we're going to continue to play with that this season. It's a whole huge thing, but it's here in metal season where if we choose to cherish the unknown, like I was saying before, and really lean into it and seeing it as a place of new emergence of potentials as the old structures are dissolving, we can come through it with greater clarity and knowing of the preciousness of life and of ourselves. And that's really kind of the gift of metal and the gift of grief, is this greater awareness around what's most precious. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So now I wanted to talk about the seasonal associations of metal. So these are kind of like the nuts and bolts. When you see on Instagram, when we post our seasonal guides and we have the lists of all the things like the organ systems, the time of day, the emotion, the life phase, all of that stuff. These are the things that we're going to be talking about here. So I wanted to go into, there's so much here that we haven't spent time on yet, partly because we weren't doing a podcast. And also, you kind of worry that it's too much, but I feel like, then you just won't watch, and that's okay. But for those who wanted to know more and come and geek out with me on this stuff, I thought it would be cool to kind of get into it a little bit more. So as I said before, metal season is it's the fall. It's the autumn season. And it goes from Autumn Equinox to Winter Solstice. So there's some months here that we're spending in this energy, necessarily so. And the organ officials that are involved are the lung and large intestine. And so there's this energy of, kind of down and in, but there's also this rhythmic energetic that comes into play, right? We breathe in and out rhythmically. Our large intestines contract and expand with peristalsis. We're breathing in what we need and releasing what we don't. Our large intestines receive the waste that's no longer needed from our small intestine and excrete it out in our poop. There's this rhythmic energetic to it. There's also a lot here about we call it Wei Qi in Chinese medicine, our protective Qi. So we're talking about like our literal immune systems. We know like the lungs are often involved in external pathogenic invasions that we call flus and colds. They're, one of the defenses against infection. And then also we know that our large intestine holds a lot of microbiome, good, healthy bacteria that builds the vitality of our immune system. There's more to it for sure, but I think that's enough for now. So already here we can see themes of inspiration and refinement and receiving what's nourishing and releasing what's not. The time of day for metal so the lung time of day is 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. And the large intestine time of day is 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. And so these are really good times to, if you're awake, some good breath work, some good deep breath work is helpful. That might be something that we talk about either in this episode or another episode of metal season. But also like a lot of us wake up between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. and so you want to poop. Your body's like, hey, it's time to poop. And that's part of this vital metallic process of releasing what's no longer serving and making room for the new day, right? A lot of people wake up around this lung time, this 3 to 5 a.m. Some of that is either some like stagnation or stuck energy in the chi cycle where it ends with the liver energetic and where it begins anew with the lung. There's a lot that has to happen there. And so if there's either stuck energy there, a lot of stress maybe, or, like consternation, people can wake up at that time. Or if there's deficiency there, if there's, like actual like immune system issues, people can wake up there. Or if there's long-standing unresolved grief that really depletes our lung energy, and it depletes it, but it can also stagnate it and make it stuck. And so a lot of times when people come to me saying I'm waking up between 3 to 5 a.m., I'm going to be asking questions about grief and, attachment and acceptance and themes around all of that. The emotion for metal season, it's grief. It's just, there's this energetic of grief, right? Because we're talking about letting things go, surrendering, acceptance, that kind of thing. So there's innately and importantly grief there, and grief serves really important purposes. It can, alchemically, we transform grief into presence. When you've lost something that you really care about, it sort of like heightens your senses and heightens your awareness, and you get really present with what's happening in the moment. Physiologically and emotionally and spiritually, that happens. And presence, I always say, is one of, if not the most important tools that we have in our well-being. It's just our conscious presence. So it's a massive gift that grief can give us. There's also this clarity around what's precious, what's most vital, what's most essential, that comes as a gift of grief. The life phase of metal is decay and seeds being released and buried. This thing where the old dies away and gives over its richness and nourishment to the new, to the future. So that's what we're talking about here. And also, this idea of the seed where the blueprint of life is held. We'll talk about that more with water season, but the seed is planted here. The color for metal is white. And, yes, there's this ephemeral, kind of spiritual purity that comes in when we're talking about the metal element. But traditionally in China, white was the color of death. It's the color of mourning. Here in the West, we wear black when we're mourning. In ancient China, they wore, and they may still wear, white during their grieving process. And it's the color of bones. It's the color of the deepest of the deep of us in the depths of the earth. The odor of metal. And so we have these diagnostic tools that we use to assess imbalances in people and their inner elements, and also kind of constitutionally where they tend to just be at, where their kind of energetics are constitutionally. And so this is where, the color and the odor and the sound and things like that come into play, because we can see these things express themselves, or hear or smell these things express themselves in people. And it gives us an idea of the state of the balance of their organ networks. So, like, diagnostically, the color white in a metal person, we're going to see it kind of here on the side of the eye. And it's like a luminescent, shiny white that comes in, rather than like a faded, depleted red fire element. So I won't spend too much time there because this is not a Chinese medical class, but that's what we're talking about with these. And so the odor is, we all smell like stuff, right? We all smell like something. And so when people are imbalanced or balanced in their metal element, the odor of rotten odor comes through. And when a metal element person is balanced, their rotten smell is really faint and subtle, kind of like the smell of leaves decaying in autumn, which I don't know about you, but I kind of love. I love to bury myself in the leaves and just lay on the ground, but I'm also a very metallic person constitutionally. So unbalanced, when there's unwellness in a metal person's metal element, the smell gets stronger and it starts to smell a little bit more like rotting meat. It's one of those ones that's very present when it's imbalanced. The sound, so the pathological sound that happens, or just the constitutional sound that happens of somebody with a metallic constitution, is weeping. And it can either sound like, and sometimes it comes through in my voice. I'm an earth metal constitution. So sometimes my voice sounds real sing-songy, like, hello, I'm here. And other times, I think, especially when I'm tired or really stressed out or whatever, there's this kind of like faint trailing off at the end that gets kind of wispy or kind of like cracked at the end of my sentences or the end of my words. Or it can also be this feeling like somebody's going to cry at any moment, whether they're actually crying or not. It's this sense of, impending tears. And the healing sound, so this is a sound that we can use to actually tonify and nourish the metal element, it's like a huzz. And if you hit it just right, you can feel it vibrating in your lungs and maybe even in your intestines. I tend to not notice it in my intestines until a few rounds of it. You can do it 3 to 9 times, and it actually nourishes and tonifies your organs. It's really kind of cool. If you have a lot of inflammation going on in either your lung or large intestine and you do that sound, you can feel that inflammation kind of ease. Or if there's tenderness there or pain, you can feel it kind of ease and lessen. And just kind of this sense of more space comes in. So the flavor associated with the metal element is pungent. Kind of like pungent, spicy stuff like onions and garlic and daikon radish. And horseradish is another one. Not only are those all white foods, so energetically and vibrationally, I guess I should say, the whiteness we know has an affinity for the lung and large intestine, for the metal element in our bodies. But also physiologically, these foods are rich in sulfur, which help us detox and clear things out easily. They kind of help open things up and breathe a little bit more. And they also help clear dampness or phlegm or mucus is what non-Chinese medicine people say. We call it mucus. In Chinese medicine, we call it dampness or phlegm. The sense organ associated with metal element is the nose. And obviously, it's a portal to the lungs, right? We're breathing in through our nose and sometimes out through our nose if we like to, or if we're doing good closed mouth breathing. But it's also this, and this will make a little bit more sense here in a few minutes. It's about the sense of smell and this link to the ancient part of our brains called the limbic system. It's one of the most ancient parts of our brains, right? And it's where our emotions are stirred and held, where memory is associated as well. long-term memory specifically. And it's this sort of ancient and instinctual part of us. And it's an opening to the underworld, right? To the inside, underneath of our bodies. And, we use our sense of smell to, like, this animalistic, instinctual part of ourselves. Our sense of smell is a huge part of that we use to sense danger, like toxic gases and fumes and chemicals, or if a food is fresh or if it's gone bad. So it really kind of tunes into this body wisdom. It's one of the most potent senses that we have that pulls us into our instinctual, somatic wisdom. And so that felt important to talk about for reasons that we'll say here in a few minutes. And then the body tissue associated with the metal element is the skin and hair, specifically the body hair. So the skin, like for me, I know that the seasons are turning. It's like maybe my third indicator that the seasons are turning when my skin starts to get a little bit more dry. Like my hands get a little bit more dry. My face gets a little bit more dry in certain places. So it's that, but it's also this, this protective barrier. And I mentioned that the metal element has a lot to do with our Wei Qi, our protective energy. And our skin is the largest, protective boundary that we have. And it also keeps us contained within ourselves. So it keeps things out that should be out, and it keeps things in that should be in. And then the body hair also is like a protective kind of mechanism. But for me, body hair feels, and same with skin too, it's this other way of tuning into the ephemeral, of tuning into and feeling the texture of the energies around us. And I have an exercise that we can do around that if we want to, but I just invite you to kind of bring your consciousness to your skin and to your body hair when you have some time to be really still and present, and notice what your body hair is sensing in the field around you. Notice what your skin is sensing in the field around you. And you'll feel your field open up and expand and become more present and more aware of all that's going on around you. But it takes that presence, that metallic presence, and that willingness to be curious with the not knowing. So that just felt fun. The virtue of metal is this selflessness, right? It's this, I'm giving myself over to something bigger than myself. Not only in physical form and, like mineralization and nurturance and stability and structure for the future, but also in spirit. I am trusting in the process. I'm allowing something to die off, to die away, and trusting in the process that new life will come as a result. The mantra for metal season, I bet you can guess what it is. The mantra for metal season is, I surrender to transformation. It's sort of this, downward bowing to, I surrender to transformation. It's this really kind of humble posture of, I don't know what's going to happen, but I trust in something bigger than myself. I surrender to transformation. The spirit of metal is called the Po soul, the corporeal soul. It's the body soul that governs our autonomic nervous system and our automatic responses. It's the spirit that governs our deeper instincts and our unconscious aspects. It's the messenger that delivers deep ancestral and epigenetic wisdom up from the depths of our deepest, oldest parts into the light of our conscious awareness. It's the purest yin energy, and it's also the most feared, shunned, and marginalized parts of us by our modern culture. It's the parts of us that we have disowned and abandoned and refused to be with and look at. And when we refuse to be with and look at and acknowledge anything or anybody, it can play out in distorted ways. And so that looks scary or unnerving or unsettling or like a mess, like chaos. But really all it's asking for is our presence. There's deep wisdom, somatic experiencing and somatic therapy and somatic exercises, are huge right now. There's a massive sort of intuitive call to return within ourselves and to reclaim what's there. And part of what's required there, like we were talking about before, is this willingness to be with it, to be with the chaos, to be with the unknown, to be with the dark, to be with our shadow, and to just be curious about what's there. And to be in the unknowing. And there's this part that requires this sort of radical honesty with ourselves about where we're really at, what's really coming up, and that, that tolerance for confusion, the tolerance for the resistance and the tantruming that comes up when we start to look at these parts of ourselves, and a willingness to just sit with it and hold space. We're walking into this season knowing that shit's gonna come up. It already is. It already is. And the more we resist it and try to shove it back down and fight it and block it and ignore it and abandon it, the more power we give it. Right? We all know that what we resist persists. But the minute that we can come in and choose to sit with it and sit next to it and be curious about what's there, we ease the tension. We create spaciousness. That's another attribute of metal energy, is this spaciousness. I mean, you think about the leaves have fallen off of the trees and there's more space around the trees. There's more, we can see their true nature more, their true form more. And that's what we're doing here. That's the invitation, is to create some more spaciousness around ourselves and what's within, what's in the unknown, to create more space and presence there so that we can bring it into wholeness and use it as the treasure that it is, use it as the vital essence that it really is, as opposed to these distorted, abandoned parts of ourselves that are playing up in life-negating ways. We can be with them and alchemize them into life-giving nourishment. Okay, so I wanted to share a tool about this, seeing with different eyes. We're opening up our perception to seeing in the dark. Right? We're coming down and in to the underworld where, the language of our body soul isn't like logical words and sentences. It's symbol and sensation. And so it requires us to perceive things differently. We were talking about sensing the field and the texture of the energies in our field with our skin and our body hair. And we need to in order to kind of be present with ourselves at this level of the metallic soul, the body soul, it requires us to see differently. So I'm reminded of something that one of my teachers says, Bob Quinn. He says that we need to be able to, as practitioners, but I think even as beings in transformational times who are looking to move through our wounds and our hardnesses to come back into ourselves, we need to be willing to, or at least try to, see with our hands and feel with our eyes. Because again, our body soul doesn't communicate in logical sentences and thought patterns. It communicates in image, in dream, and sensation. And so we're, with this point in flower essence combination, we are opening up new eyes. We are opening ourselves up to a new way of perceiving into the depths of our being here. And so this point that I wanted to share is on the bladder channel, which the bladder is the clock opposite of the lung. So I shared earlier that the lung's time of day is 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. and the bladder's time of day is 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. So energetically, they are connected, and nourishing one can support the other and vice versa. And so they are intricately interconnected and work together in service to this seeing in the dark. The lung is the metal element, which is the mother of the water element, and the bladder is part of the water element. So we're supporting both here. So this point is the first external point on the bladder meridian, and the bladder meridian is the longest meridian on the body. There are 67 points, and it starts here at the inner canthus and goes up and down our back and ends all the way like down the middle of the back of our legs and ends at the pinky toe. It's an entire body meridian. It's massive, and it has a lot to do with our evolution as humans. You know, we kind of come in as these sparks of divinity, kind of integrate into these physical yin, dense material bodies, and then eventually, and then there's all this evolution and transformation and turmoil that happens as an embodied being. And then eventually we transform and transcend back to where we came from. And so those are kind of the themes of the bladder meridian. But this point here, Jingming, bright eyes, it's, kind of right here. If you use your pinky to feel into your inner canthus area here, kind of at the upper bridge of the orbital bone, you'll feel an indention there. You'll feel one of the foramen that kind of comes through there. It might be a little bit tender. And that's where bladder 1 is. This point physiologically brightens the eyes. It improves vision. Yes, we needle into this point to help with all kinds of vision problems, both physiological and psycho-spiritual, energetic, those kinds of things. It's a very important point because you can see here it's the meeting point of a lot of meridians. It's the meeting point of the bladder meridian. So all of these meridians and energetic systems converge here. The bladder, the small intestine, the stomach, the gallbladder, the triple warmer, the sanjiao, the governing vessel, the yin and yang motility vessel. So we have a lot going on here about, how we're being physically and spiritually in this world We have a lot about discernment, a lot about processing and digestion and transformation, and a lot about how I'm walking my path is here. But just the name, bright eyes, Jingming. Jing refers to our essence, the sort of deepest deep of who we are, the, most distilled parts of ourselves. And Ming kind of calls into this clarity and purity and, having the clarity to see to the truth of things. And so there is this energetic about seeing in the dark here, seeing with these different kinds of eyes, seeing to the level of spirit, seeing to the depths of our being where our ancestral wisdom lives, and also seeing through deception and distortion with clear eyes and clarity of vision. So this point, Bladder 1 has a lot to do with those energetics. It helps us cultivate those nighttime eyes, those eyes that feel and perceive things in a different way than we typically think of seeing as being. Something that I really love using here is a Lotus Way flower essence blend called Awakened Perception. And I mean, the name kind of says it all, but there's so much here and I won't go into all of it, but I like to use the anointing oil here on this point, and just put a little drop on my pinkies and just gently massage this Bladder 1 point. This blend, again, I could talk about it a lot, but it seems to help, and I'm fairly new to Lotus Way. I've been working with them just since, almost a year. It's just under a year. So I'm still learning. There's so much here. But this blend seems to have a lot to do with the themes that we're talking about in metal, where we're seeing with different eyes, we're perceiving things in ways that we haven't perceived, even just the feeling of it on my fingers. Like I can feel, almost these like tendrils, kind of like incense smoke, like I can feel more than I could before. My eyes feel like they're seeing, different planes here. That might be a lot for a lot for daytime, but there's a lot happening here, and it's about opening our perception of things and seeing with different eyes and feeling with new sensations and new perceptions and perspectives. But there's also a lot here about ancestral wisdom that seems to be stirred, and this somatic body wisdom. I mean, obviously, smell is involved here, this sense organ of the metal element, and that coming into our limbic system in our brains and pulling on emotions and memories that are still really unconscious. We can't, I feel like, but they're still really ephemeral and not concrete, and they don't have to be. This kind of work, we don't have to know and fully cognize all that's happening. We're not meant to. That's not the point. But the thing that I love about flower essences is that they help to repattern energetics in a way that serves us going forward. So if there's, blockage around my perception and things that I'm unwilling to see about myself or about the world or about another specific person or, whatever, a specific issue, this blend feels like it helps to rework that weaving. It helps to reweave that patterning so that I am more tolerant of the confusion and the pain that may be there, or the wounds that may be there, or the chaos that may be there. And it just kind of creates this spaciousness and willingness to just sit with what comes up, and also to be able to perceive it in a deeper, more meaningful way than I was able to before. It's not traumatic at all. Flower essences are so subtle and gentle and loving, but they are very potent and profoundly healing. And so it's not that I'm having to like relive traumas or re-experience wounding episodes. It's that I can, my being, I'm putting my trust in something bigger than myself, and my being, my body soul, my soul knows what to do and how to work with this medicine in a way that opens me up to be able to perceive things differently than I could before, and in a really alchemical way that allows me to work with what's there instead of allowing it to, be distorted and be a place of wounding. I can work with what's there and let it be life nourishing instead of life negating. And I cannot think of, there's so many tools here, but this feels like a very important one to work with in metal season, but especially in this metal season. So I wanted to share that in combination with Bladder 1, bright eyes, to help us see with different eyes and feel differently. So that's kind of the gist of metal season. And those are the metal season associations. I could go on and on and on. But for now, that feels good. Just to recap, metal season is all about letting go and surrendering to the inevitability of change. There's a pull to return to the below, to the down and in, to the underworld. We're surrendering to the unknown. We're walking into the unknown, where death makes way for new life and the emergence of new potentials. Everything is possible here. The old is disintegrating, and in its death, it gives over to us. It offers back its richness so that the life cycle can distill and refine its most precious essences in service to nourishing life going forward. You can see how this is a profoundly important part of the life cycle that we have conspicuously been made to be afraid of. And understandably, it's scary. Walking into the unknown and the chaos that's probably there, that's necessarily there, is intimidating. But it's also built into our anatomy. It's built into the anatomy of existence here on this planet. It's a natural and important part of the entirety of the life cycle. And that means that we know how to be with it. We know how to move through it. We have everything that we need to get through transformational times. But it requires our presence and our care and our willingness to be uncomfortable and to not know. And that's what's up with metal season. We have a lot more to talk about, a lot more tools to share, but for now, that feels pretty good. So hold on for episode 2 of however many. Thanks for being here. See you soon.